Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our program this morning. I am Joan Landis, and I'm on the education team at Weedon Island Preserve. We are super excited to kick off this morning a brand new series focused on archaeology and also archaeology at Weedon Island Preserve. It's been quite a while since we've been able to focus in on some of this cool work that we do here and the scientists that are responsible for it. And so we are happy that you guys could join us today. We are featuring the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and our speaker is Rachel Kangas, who is the outreach coordinator for us in our local area. So welcome to Rachel.
Thank you, Joan. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for tuning in on Zoom today. As Joan mentioned, my name is Rachel Kangas, and I work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network as the coordinator for our West Central region. I'm super excited. I have been an archaeologist for about 10 years. I've been working for FPAN for 6, but I just started in the Tampa Bay area. So I just moved here. I just started as a coordinator in this specific region. I moved up from Fort Myers, covering our Southwest region. So this is the first talk that I've gotten to give about Weedon Island, and it is such a cool site, and I'm so excited to share with you some of the archaeology and the history of the site. When I was meeting with Joan and others setting up this series of talks, I was just blown away by how this one site really kind of gives us a full history, a nice, blanket history of the Tampa Bay area. We can talk about all sorts of things within the archaeology and, the lives of people who used to live in Tampa Bay. And it's a really cool site to talk about archaeology as a discipline. So we're going to talk about a little bit of all of that today. So like I said, I work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and our West Central region is based out of the University of South Florida. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to go over kind of the connections and the ancestry of the site. We're going to talk about, of course, the layout of the site and what the site actually looks like. If you've ever visited, hopefully you have visited or will soon. If you visited the site, I want you to kind of get an idea of where on the site you actually were. We'll talk about the history of the excavations and the archaeology at the site. And then we'll talk about Weedon Island as a place for education. So Weedon Island is a really interesting site because it's, as an archaeology student and someone who is learning about Florida archaeology, this site comes up all the time when you're learning about the archaeology of Florida. And it's a huge popular site. A lot of people know about it. As I said, I just moved to the area. So when I meet people and I'm like, where do you like to go kayaking? Where do you like to go hiking? Everybody mentions Weedon Island. And I, of course, as an archaeologist, I'm like, oh, that's a really cool site. Did you know about that? There's a huge archaeological site there. And sometimes people kind of know, but really a lot of people don't know the history of the site. And part of that is because there's actually not been a whole lot of archaeology that's happened here. We'll talk about the history of archaeology at the site, but really it hasn't been until the last 10 years that we've actually gotten good archaeology happening at the site. So archaeology started, 100 years ago at the site, but it's not until pretty recently that we've actually had, good archaeology that was actually with the goal of learning about what people's lives were like when they were living at this site. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. So before we start talking about anything, I want to get a few definitions out of the way, just to make sure we're all on the same page, because I know as an archaeologist, I will just throw these words around, and I want to make sure you all know what I'm talking about and what I say when I mean these, or what I mean when I say these words. So the first one is midden, M-I-D-D-E-N. So this is a multi-layer living surface that's made of shells, sediment, and artifacts built up over time. I actually, behind me here, have this very cool midden stratigraphy. So stratigraphy is just the different layers. So this really cool midden that they actually have out in the learning center here. So you can you don't need to see all the specifics of it, but you can see that there are different layers, right? There's a shell layer here, and then there's a little layer of mostly dirt up here, and then there's some more shell. So all those layers, all this together makes up a midden. And usually when we talk about middens, we're talking about kind of basically people's trash. It's the things that people build up over time as they're living at a site. And just kind of over time, these things sort of build up and they'll make, they'll make elevation, they'll actually make the site taller. But a lot of times this is the really good stuff that archaeologists want to look for when we actually want to learn about people's lives, because this, like I said, this is basically their trash. Think about all the things you throw away in a day or a week or a month, and what people can learn from you about your trash. And that's basically the same idea. We're just looking at trash that's like a couple thousand years old. So that's what a midden is. When I say midden, this is what I mean. A site, I've already said it like 15 times in the last 2 minutes. A site is a place today where the remains of activities from long ago are still located. So we're going to talk about this site, the Weedon Island site, and it's just this place, and I'll show you some maps of it, where the remains of human activity still are still present today. And another term that I'm going to use off and on is the term looting. So this is the illegal digging and taking of artifacts and other remains. So I'll use some of those words. If there are any other words that I use that you aren't familiar with, just put them in the chat box. As Joan said, I'll try to kind of keep an eye on the chat. I cannot multitask, so I will not be reading things as they come in. But if there's a question or anything like that, please feel free to either use the Q&A box or the chat box to put those in. If I see it, I can answer it right away, or at the very least, I'll get to it at the end. So as Joan said, I have a couple of polls for you today, so I'm going to keep you on your toes. So don't go too far from your computer or your device. So let me launch this real quick. Hold on one second. So this is poll number 1. Okay, so the question is, whose ancestors are at this site? Is it 1, everyone's ancestors? 2, there are no descendants from the people who lived at this site present here today? 3, current indigenous people of Florida, especially the Seminole? Or 4, the site was built by aliens? This is not the correct answer. Please do not pick number 4. I put it on there so I can talk about it. So take a few minutes. I already see we've got about 36% of folks have answered this. So take a minute. You don't have to have the answer right. I, of course, will answer it for you, but I kind of want to see where your knowledge is at about the descendants of this site, if there are any. So this is something that I don't think archaeologists talk about enough. So I wanted to make sure to put this right up front. So I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds. Let's see if we can get a few more people to answer. Excellent. Okay, so we've got most people, the majority of people got this right, and the correct answer is current indigenous people of Florida, especially the Seminole. So very nice. I'll go ahead and end that poll and put it away. So that is the correct answer, the current indigenous people of Florida. But before we talk about the Seminole, I want to take just a minute, maybe a few minutes, and talk about this number 4, that the site was built by aliens. So I put this in here specifically because as a public archaeologist, as someone who talks about archaeology, I get the question all of the time, or I get people either joking or seriously asking me if aliens have built archaeological sites in Florida and all around the world. And the answer is no. We have no evidence thus far that aliens have built any site on Earth. And this sometimes is said as kind of a joke. Sometimes people really believe it. I'm sure probably just about everyone on this call has either heard of or seen at least one show on the History Channel or Discovery Channel about, how ancient aliens built a site. And while this might sound intriguing or just kind of funny, it's actually a really big problem, which is why I wanted to bring it up and talk about it a little bit. So this idea that aliens built any site anywhere in the world is a problem because it assumes at its core that people who lived during those times could not have figured out how to do this, or they didn't have the brains basically to figure out how to build these sites. And that is absolutely not true. People who built Weedon Island, people who built the pyramids, people who built all of these different sites, they are biologically exactly the same as we are today. They were as smart as we are. They were as creative as they are. They weren't running around Weedon Island with iPhones, but they were smart. They were engineers. They were people who could look at a landscape and change it and make it work for them. So this idea that aliens built any of these sites, while it might seem kind of funny or, like not a big deal, the people who come up with this is actually a really big problem, because these arguments basically say that people in the past were inferior to people today. And those same arguments are used to create a lot of the social issues that we have today. So this is where a lot of racist ideas that, people of different cultures or backgrounds or skin colors or anything like that are somehow inferior to other people, this is one of those kernels that starts those issues. So this is actually a really big problem. So I wanted to make sure that I brought that up and kind of, brought it to your attention. If you've seen those shows, if any of your friends, have seen those shows, again, as a public archaeologist, people literally all the time talk to me about ancient aliens. So I always try to kind of gently bring this up, that these are actually, it's not true. We have no evidence to suggest that. And people who were living here thousands of years ago are just as smart and capable as we are today. So that is my soapbox about ancient aliens and why it's a problem. So let's talk about the actual ancestors, or who the ancestors are, the actual descendants of people at the Weedon Island site. So the Seminole tribe of Florida have ancestry rights to the site of Weedon Island and to most sites in Florida. So the Seminole as a group, you might be familiar, they actually formed in the 1700s, and they were basically made up of groups of refugees and survivors from many different tribes around the state of Florida and around kind of the whole southeast of North America. So basically during, the Seminole were originally made up from a lot of Creek people. So a lot of Creek tribes from like southern Georgia, southern Alabama, moved into Florida and were basically fleeing violence, genocide, and all of the other terrible things that Europeans brought to North America. So they were kind of fleeing these things and moving further and further south. And as these groups moved south, like I said, survivors and refugees from other tribes that were in Florida that had also been decimated by European invasion kind of joined up, and they made this conglomerate group that would be called the Seminole. They're very proud, as I think they totally should be, that they never surrendered and they were never defeated. So the Seminole as a group, they formed and they moved further and further into South Florida, deep into the Everglades. And they basically stayed there as an autonomous group until the United States would recognize them as a federally recognized tribe. So the Seminole are the group that have ancestry rights to Weedon Island. And so their ancestors are the people who lived their lives at, died at, and still remain at the site today. So this is really important, I think, as visitors and people who recreate at the site. If you're going kayaking, if you're going hiking, keep this in mind, that this is a sacred site. This is an important site where people literally lived their entire lives. And especially, for me as an archaeologist, I have to be really careful about this, and I have to really think about this, and all archaeologists do. Before we do any archaeology at a site, we have to really think about the impacts that we're having on the direct descendants of people that lived at these sites. And we'll talk in just a second about how that hasn't always been the case with archaeology and why that's a really big problem. So the Seminole have ancestry at the site. So that's kind of one of the current connections to the site, right? But let's get into some of the archaeology. Okay, I've got another poll for you. So come back to your computer, come back to your device. We have another poll. So I just want to kind of, again, get a sense of where your knowledge base is at, what you know about the site. So this poll asks, the Weedon Island site is most likely is it a ceremonial site that was used just a few times a year? Is it a village site where people spent their lives here and made community? I maybe just answered this. Or was it a fortification site that was mostly used for defense against invaders? Oh man, we are getting excellent answers. 100% of you have answered it correctly. I'm glad you're paying attention. I'm glad you heard me just tell you the answer to this. Excellent. All right, we've got about 75%. Awesome. So yeah, every single person answered this correctly. Very nice. It is a village site where people spent their lives and made community. So I'll go ahead and end this poll. So let's actually look at the site, right? Let's look at what the site looks like today, what we're talking about. So one of the reasons, actually, I think the coolest thing about Weedon Island is that it is a village site. This is a site that the more we learn about it, the more we learn that this is, think of the neighborhood that you live in, the neighborhood, the city, the town that you live in, and all of the things that make it a town or a city or a neighborhood. All of those things we're finding at Weedon Island. So we've got places where people are living their lives. They're making these middens, right? If you see in this map, we've got the midden ridges. This is exactly what I'm talking about. These all the red on the map, this is the higher elevation, and the greens are the lowest elevation, and blue, of course, is water. So these arcs, you can see that the middens are basically kind of made up in arc form. So they're kind of arcing around the site like that. So these midden ridges are largely made up of just the refuse of everyday life. This is, the evidence that we have, the physical evidence of people living their lives. We've got evidence of structures being built here. We've got floor surfaces. We've got evidence of, we think of parties, like we have feasts where large groups of, or large amounts of shell and food were basically deposited at the same time. We've also got ceremonial sites, right? So think of like churches and places that you go to have sacred rituals, or to gather in those kind of places. We've got places like that at the site. We have burials at the site. We have civic spaces. So like not the DMV, but think about like the DMV, City Hall, like those places where the community comes together to kind of gather and talk and do things that make it a community. We have spaces like that also at Weedon Island. So this is a really cool site that kind of, to me at least, connects, what we think of as a community, and shows that we've had these ideas as people for thousands of years. And we see the evidence of that at Weedon Island. So this map on the left, the colorful one, is made, it's a LiDAR map. I would be happy to talk to you more about LiDAR, but basically it's a super fancy map that is made by shooting laser points from a plane. That's how it works. It's really, really cool. And it gives you really detailed elevation. So how high or low the ground is. And this map on the right is actually from the 1920s. This is from the first major excavation at the site by a guy named Fuchs. And he basically went around and drew the elevation at the site. So basically when you look at it, this is called a topographic map. So basically the smaller the circle, the higher the ground is an easy way to think of it. So if we put these two on top of each other, I think this is pretty cool. Not only does it show that Fuchs in 1920 did a really good job of mapping this site, but it also kind of helps, I think, illustrate what the site looks like today. And you can see the access road is this the road that comes around here. This is that road that goes into the Duke Energy plant. And I today am in the classroom. I am down here at the Cultural and History Center, or Education Center. This is the parking lot, that little circle that makes the parking lot if you've been down here. So the kayak launch is down here. The observation tower, if you've ever been to that or want to visit a super cool observation tower, is also down here to the south. So most of what probably most of you have seen of this site is actually this southern part of the site. So the site is huge though. And if you notice, it goes in this, like I said, this arc shape. And part of the reason that it goes in that arc shape is there's a natural dune that was laid down thousands of years, millennia before people were in this area. So before Florida even looked like it did today, when when the earth was cooler, oceans were lower. There was no water probably in any of the places that there are water today. We had natural dunes that formed. So sand blew in and kind of formed these natural arcing dunes. So that happened, thousands and thousands of years ago. And then about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, we see the earth kind of warm up, sea levels come up a little bit, and we see a lot of the fresh water throughout the state of Florida, and especially here in Tampa Bay, that kind of starts to flood in some of these areas. So when the dunes under these middens first formed, there weren't people here and there wasn't even a lot of water here. But then things start to flood. Florida gets a little bit easier to live in. We have this beautiful estuarine environment form. So if you have ever been to Weedon Island or really anywhere on the water in Tampa Bay and you've been to where there's mangroves and estuaries are a fantastic environment for people to live in. They are full of plants and animals. They are great places for resources. It's like a huge Publix that's open 24/7, right? There's tons of food, tons of resources that you can get out of the estuaries. So when this estuary forms, it's a pretty sweet place to live, right? So we can never say why people made the choices that they made, right? Because we can't talk to the people who first settled at this site, but we can make some educated guesses. So we would guess that when people first moved into this area, they're seeing these nice big mounds, right? These natural dunes. They're like, all right, there's a nice high and dry place. I can sleep and be dry, maybe up out of the mosquitoes a little bit, safe from flooding from, this Florida hurricanes. So that probably helps to influence people moving to this site. So there are these natural dunes underneath the midden, and then people moved and they started living on those naturally high areas. And then again, they made their middens over a couple thousand years. They're throwing their trash out, they're throwing everything out, and it's kind of slowly building them up to be even higher than they started to be, and to be higher to like the size that they are today. Some of these mounds are like 20 feet tall. So we imagine that people probably moved here because, again, this beautiful landscape that's got these naturally high areas that would keep them out of the water. And there's fresh water kind of dotted around the site. And we've got this nice estuarine environment in Pappy's Bayou, which is now Riviera Bay, and just kind of in this area in general. So this would have been an awesome place to live. If you visited here, you know how beautiful it is today. And think about, if you're moving somewhere and you've got to live off the land, you need a place to live, you need a place to find food. This would have been a fantastic place to do that. So that's why we think people moved in here. And we know that people started to live here about 3,000 years ago. And like I said, they built a village, they built a community, they built this site to serve their purposes of everyday life. And while they probably moved in because of those natural features, they also made a lot of changes to the environment as well. So it's not just, they moved in and they're like, well, this is where the environment says we should live, so we're going to live here. They were like, this place has the things that we need, and we can engineer it to work even better for us. So we see them building up the middens over time. We also see mounds at this site, which are basically when they take a lot of this trash and they pile it up on purpose in a shorter period of time to make a larger mound. We see mounds at the site. We have burial mounds where they're burying their dead. We have we think we have plazas that are just kind of big cleared areas where, again, people are probably coming to gather and have these civic things happening, like having community meetings and stuff like that. So we see all of this stuff here at Weedon Island, which again is why it's so cool, because it's part of, the St. Pete and Tampa Bay community today. And it has been for about 3,000 years. Okay, I've got one last poll for you. That's mine, and then you'll do another one at the end. So let me launch this poll. Come back to your computers, come back to your devices. Gonna launch a poll. So the last poll that I'm gonna ask you is, why were the first major excavations at the site conducted? So this is going to lead us into our actually talking about the archaeology at the site. So your first option is to take objects and put them in the Smithsonian Museum. Your second option is to answer a specific question about the Tampa Bay area's connection to other sites in the region. Or 3, to save the site from being destroyed by development. So go ahead and answer. Ooh, we have some very split results. We have lots of different guesses in this one. This is fantastic. So take a minute, answer what you think the correct answer is. All right, there we go. All right. Excellent. Oh my gosh, almost everybody answered. This is fantastic. So I'll go ahead and end the poll. So we have, let me tell you the results. We've got 29%, 11 people think it's to take objects and put it in the Smithsonian. 15 people think it's to answer specific questions about Tampa Bay area, and 12 people think it was to save the site from being destroyed. So we have a very even guesses in this. It's awesome. So while the answer I think should be number 2, the answer actually is number 1. The first excavations that were done at the site were actually specifically to take cool, air quotes, cool objects and put them in the Smithsonian Museum. So the first excavations at the site, the first major excavations, happened in the 1920s. And like I said, they were literally to go out and to find stuff to put in the Smithsonian. So they knew that burials often had very pretty pots in them. So they specifically came and targeted the burial mound at Weedon Island and at many other sites all around Florida and all around North America, really, in order to find these pretty and these cool, interesting objects to put in the Smithsonian. So when we look at this picture, we can see this is a huge excavation. We see all of this dirt that's been removed from the hole. We see the hole here. You can see this is, I would assume, next to this tree, this is probably a screen that the archaeologists were using to sift through the dirt and sand and find artifacts and objects. And you can see all of the people that are here visiting. So this was a site. So not only were they here to specifically find objects to put into the museums, they were really using this as a public interest spot. And they used a lot of these excavations all around Florida as public interest. So part of this, again, is to fill the Smithsonian Museum. And part of this was used by, real estate developers to get people to want to buy land here. So these things all kind of fit together, and they're basically like, look how cool this site is. You could own a part of this site and, dig it up yourself. You could find, you could own these things from this site, which is very problematic, obviously. So when the excavations were being done, not only were they looking for cool objects, but like I mentioned, they were specifically targeting burial mounds. And this is a really big problem. This is very unethical in terms of archaeology. So there were, indigenous people at the time who did not want them to be doing this. There were other archaeologists who were raising questions about targeting burial sites because these are sacred sites. And it's very problematic and unethical to be digging up people's bones to find the things that they're buried with and take them. So not only were they basically tearing through burials to find pretty pots, they were also taking the human remains themselves. So the Smithsonian especially has a really large collection specifically of human skulls. So when the archaeologists first came here, when they were first digging the site, it was very specifically to take human remains and to take burial objects. So I've been in some talks with members of the Seminole tribe, and one of them likened this practice of specifically targeting burial mounds. They said, how would it feel if someone went to Arlington National Cemetery and was digging up burials to take the things that these people were buried with? And I think that, that really kind of stuck with me. And that's a really good way to think about this. These aren't just labs where we go and take information. These are places that, as we've already talked about today, that people have direct connections with. So when archaeologists go in and have literally no care for the descendants of the people who are buried here and specifically target these burial mounds, that's a really big problem in archaeology. And it's important, archaeology can do a lot of good, but it can also do a lot of harm. And at this site especially, archaeology started out being really problematic. So they were digging these huge holes, they're finding these burials, they're finding these pots, and in the process, they're also not learning anything really about the site as a whole. Like I said, the good archaeology, the archaeology that's actually helping us understand life for people at the site, didn't happen until the last 10, 20 years. So this is another image from those early excavations. So you can see these are archaeologists, in this hole. They've got visitors all around them, and they're digging in the burial mounds. And this is basically a way for the public to come out and kind of, commodify, to turn these burials into things that, are worth money and that are worth just feeling good about yourself, which is really, really not great, really very unethical. So the beginnings of archaeology at the site are really problematic. And like I said, they really only focused. So this is our entire site, right? We've got the whole site here. These early excavations in the 1920s and in the 1950s and 60s only dug about 10% of the site. They really were not concerned with understanding what the site looked like, what the site was like, what life was like for the people who lived here. They were very specifically focused on finding cool stuff to put into museums. So again, very problematic. We are very lucky that archaeology as a discipline is changing, and that in the last 10, 15 years, we've had some really different archaeology happen here. And we're actually learning more about the site than we've ever learned before in the last 100 years. So it's a really exciting time to be involved with Weedon Island, to be visiting the site, because as more archaeology happens, as this good archaeology happens, we're actually learning like I said, how the site is a community, how it connects with the rest of Tampa Bay, how it connects with the rest of southeastern United States. So here's the map again, and again, here's the road that you drive in on. So next time you drive into Weedon Island, think about, you're driving over some midden ridges. There are midden ridges off in the distance, and when you're down here at the center and kayaking or out on the outlook, you can really get a really cool view of this whole mound. It can be hard to see with all the mangroves and everything, but this is a really immense and interesting site. So a lot of the work that's been done in the last few years was by a graduate student, a PhD student at University of Michigan, Christina Perry Sampson, and just in the last few years by master's student Heather Draskovich from University of South Florida. So a lot of this research has been supported and funded through AWARE, and we're going to have Dr. Bob Austin talk with us on our next talk in December about some of the work that AWARE has done. But this is where Heather, that master's student from University of South Florida, these are all of the areas that she looked at for her master's thesis. So remember the earlier excavations, they really were looking here and here, which is why we don't have a good understanding of this site. But Heather has been able to go through, she really tried to get a good idea of the site as a whole. So she did much smaller excavations and survey, which is kind of like walking on the surface. And basically what she was able to find, she found production areas. So we now know through Heather and Christina's work that there are areas of production at the site. So we know that some of the households in like smaller areas, they're making shell beads. We've got, basically think of taking a seashell and turning it into a small bead that you could put on, a necklace or bracelet or something like that. And they found like every step along that process at some of these sites. So we know where people are actually getting and making shell beads. We've got lithic workshops where people are finding stones that they can make tools out of, and they're chipping them down into the tools that they would eventually use. So we're getting such a better understanding of what the site was like as a community. So not only, do we have the burial mound that we know about and that was unfortunately almost completely destroyed in the 20s and since then, but we also have all of these other, I would argue, more interesting places that we can learn so much more from without, disturbing burials. We've got, like I said, production areas. We know that people are going out into Riviera Bay probably, and they're finding these shells and they're using them to make the beads. And these beads, these shell artifacts, are being traded all throughout the Tampa Bay area. They're also going like up into Ohio and Wisconsin. These are huge trade networks that in a lot of cases are starting right here at Weedon Island in these estuaries at the places where we have these shells. So this is just one interesting site in this entire group and this entire, trading network that goes, like I said, all the way up to Ohio, up to Wisconsin, and connects all of these people together. So again, people who are living here, 3,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, they were getting around. They had ways to travel. They had ways to communicate with other groups. They were trading. They're not just sitting here at Weedon Island, just sitting here by themselves. They're connecting with people all over the area and all over this, this side of North America. So it's a really fascinating site, and we get to enjoy this site as a preserve today. So Heather's research and Christina's research has really done a lot to expand our knowledge of just how cool this site is. And their work was really pretty introductory. They've done some really pretty small excavations. They've done a lot of mapping and things like that. So with the work of AWARE and other researchers from USF and from all over, we're going to learn more and more about the site and what the lives of people at the site were like 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. So when we think about the impacts that the research at the site has today, again, it helps us understand the everyday life of people at this site, what it was like to live in the community of Weedon Island 1,000 years ago. It helps us to broaden the understanding of how people constructed their villages and communities. Again, they're coming to this area, they see those natural rises, those natural dunes, and they say, you know what, we can live here, we can make this work. And they're they use this natural landscape, but they also change it and engineer it to work for them. Like I said, how the site actually connects to other places throughout Florida, and we see lots of similar types of pottery and decoration and building styles throughout Florida and throughout the entire southeastern United States, and pretty much this entire side of the US today. So this is a really cool site that we can not just learn about estuaries and Tampa Bay, but we can learn about all of these places from this one site. But again, it's always important for visitors who want to come and enjoy the site, and especially, like I said, for me and for other archaeologists, we really have to think about the cost and at what cost do we know this information. So those early archaeologists, they desecrated the sacred burials of over 450 people. So they ignored their humanity, they took their skulls, they took their burial objects, and that's what started this site as such a popular site, is those really problematic excavations. So we have to think about the impact that that has today. And one of the ways that we can think about that and kind of interact with that as visitors and as people who care about this site today is through the initiative called No More Stolen Ancestors. This is an initiative started by the Seminole tribe to get their ancestors back from the Smithsonian Museum. So there, in the last 20 years, have been lots of different laws that have been passed to try and help get Indigenous people their ancestors' bones. However, a lot of those really haven't been working the way that it sounds like they should. So the Seminole Tribe of Florida has started this No More Stolen Ancestors initiative to get their hundreds of ancestors back, specifically from the Smithsonian. But it's important to keep in mind that institutions like schools and museums all over Florida, all over the United States, have the bones of these ancestors. And it's important for us, again, as people today, as people who enjoy the site and love the site and respect the site, to keep this in mind and to support initiatives like this. So finally, the site as a preserve today. So the Weedon Island site is, as you all know, I'm sure, is a preserve site. And this is an important site for preserving the natural history of Tampa Bay, the amazing plants and animals that live in this area, the very delicate estuarine environment that we have here in Tampa Bay. This is really important to preserving all of that natural beauty. And it's important for preserving that cultural history and for helping to keep those sites safe, to make sure that if they're going to be researched, that they're researched ethically, but also to engage the community in that. We at FPAN have helped to run public labs to help people interact with midden sites. So this refuse of daily life, to help people understand the site better, to help them really engage with not just the cool plants, not just the cool animals, but also how cool this site is and how cool the history of the site is. So helping us to understand how not only was this site a community, a neighborhood, a town in the past, but how it's a part of our community in St. Pete and the Tampa Bay area today. So we're really, really fortunate to have this site as a preserve and to have all of the people who put in the effort to help interpret the site and bring the public out to the site. So the very last thing is that, archaeology is still happening at Weedon Island. Luckily, it's happening in a much more ethical way today. And we are gonna have Dr. Bob Austin from AWARE join us on December 11th. And he has helped with tons of excavations at the site. He is always the person that I go to when I have questions about the site. So it's going to be a really fantastic talk when we have Dr. Austin out on December 11th. So keep an eye out on wherever you found the link for this site. Keep an eye out there for the links to that future site, to that future talk in December. And then again, in January, we'll have Kendall Jackson talk about his PhD research out here at the site. So that is what I have for my talk today. So I will go ahead and I will stop sharing my screen. I've seen some things popping up in the questions and in the chat. So let me get that up. Right.
What a great overview, Rachel. Thank you so much. And we do have some great questions queued up for you, and more coming in.
Excellent. Yeah, so if anybody has questions, feel free to use either the chat box or the Q&A. Let's see, I'm going to open the Q&A first. So you're saying that the descendants of the Seminole tribe lived on Weedon Island. There was no break like one sees with the Anasazi in the Southwest. Okay, so excellent question. So this is about the ancestry at the site and the Seminole ancestry. So from what we can tell, there is pretty continuous occupation of the site. There, again, the site has not been researched that thoroughly, so there's a lot that's still left to be done to figure out exactly when people were or weren't living at the site. We have some indications that actually a lot of sites in Tampa Bay and even down where I used to work in Fort Myers and in that area, that a lot of those coastal sites were actually left for a couple hundred years when basically the earth went into a cold snap and the ice caps got bigger and the oceans got lower, and those estuaries that are maybe 5 to 10 feet deep probably emptied out. There was a bunch of other cultural stuff happening, of course, but when we have these big climate change events and when we have lots of other cultural impacts, we actually have some evidence that people were moving away from some of these sites and then they're coming back later. Some of Heather's, I won't get too into Heather's research, but Heather did a really fantastic job of showing that people actually move across the site over time. So they kind of start in the northwest and move to the southeast of the site over the couple thousand years that they're living there. So, and whether or not the site was inhabited fully at 1513 when the Spanish first arrived in Florida or not, the descendants of the people who made this site, who built the site, who lived at the site, were still in the area and were still part of the group that formed the Seminole tribe. So that's an excellent question. I know it kind of gets in the weeds a little bit, but it's really important. Again, for me as an archaeologist and for people who enjoy the site to kind of keep that in mind, that there are direct contacts to people today. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Patricia asked if there was a freshwater source. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Hold on one second, Patricia. Let me see if I can figure this out. Oh, let me get my, hold on. Bring up my map. Okay. Hopefully I do not mess this up. Okay, so wait, is this the one that I want? This isn't the one that I want. Hold on one second. Sorry, I pulled up the wrong map. Okay. So one of the things that Heather talks about in her master's thesis, which is really cool because it just got published or it just got released. She just graduated recently. So one of the things that she suggests, and we have more that we need to research to say for sure if this is what was happening, but we do think that there were some freshwater resources towards the north and that people were maybe coming up to some fresh water that was kind of up north here. And then over time, we think maybe it is an idea that still needs to be tested, that perhaps as the landscape was changing and as the climate was changing, that people might have been moving south down into this area because perhaps they were trying to get closer to some of the freshwater springs. And I think these are the springs here. I'm not 100% sure. So there was fresh water around the site. We know of a couple of them, and the Tampa Bay area and really Florida in general, because of the geology, there are basically little freshwater springs that kind of pop up from the aquifers all over the place. So so that's a really, really good question, is was there fresh water? We know that there was at least some. There's probably more than even we're aware of. So yeah, so there was fresh water at the site. Let's see, we've got another question from Nancy. Will ancestors be reburied at Weedon Island when they are returned? Nancy, that is an excellent question. That is not for me to decide. That is a question that the Seminole tribe and descendant groups have to answer. Sometimes remains are reburied at the site where they were found. Sometimes they're reburied in other places. Again, I would basically say whatever the Seminole want to happen with their ancestors is what I would support happening. So I can't say for sure, but that is an excellent, excellent question. Patricia asked, how do the Seminole differ from the Calusa? Patricia, I don't know if you asked me this specifically because I'm from Southwest Florida, but thank you for adding in that Calusa connection. So like I said at the very top, I just came from Fort Myers. So I was in, Calusa land for 6 years. So how do the Seminole differ from the Calusa? So the Seminole, as a group, came after the Calusa, but I would argue the same thing as I am arguing for the people who lived at Weedon Island, that the Calusa, they were here when the Spanish arrived in 1513. And a lot of people say that all the Calusa left, either they they died through disease, direct violence, genocide that the Europeans brought, or they got on boats and left for Cuba, right? I would never, like, as an archaeologist, I would never believe that argument that everyone left. So I always, say to people, until someone shows me the registry of those boats and says, yep, that's the checklist, that's the last Calusa person on a boat going to Cuba, there are no more Calusa. Until someone shows me that, I will never believe that that was the case. I always think of hurricanes, oddly enough. So think about, any hurricane coverage you've seen. When Irma came, I was in Fort Myers when Irma hit. Any hurricane, even when there are mandatory evacuations, the news is always covering, those people that are sitting on their front porch and they're like, I'm not going anywhere, right? So I would imagine that there were, Calusa who also said the same thing, that they were like, yeah, this is really terrible, but I'm not leaving. I'm not going to Cuba. So the best guess that we have is that the refugees and survivors of the Calusa, of people at Weedon Island, and of people all over the state of Florida joined together to create the Seminole. So that's kind of the connection with the Seminole and the Calusa. So excellent question, Patricia. Is there a map to show? Oh my gosh, is there a map to show where Weedon Island is? You're not familiar with Tampa Bay. You know what? There is. Let me stop sharing my screen and I'm going to try and Google it and talk at the same time. We'll see if it works, but that is an excellent question. And I should absolutely have had a map up there. So give me just a second. I'm going to give you all a map of exactly where Weedon Island is. Okay, so hold on. I've got it. Let me pull it over here. Let me zoom out. Man, thank you so much for asking this. And sorry that I didn't have this up earlier. Okay, sharing my screen. So we're in, so we've got the Tampa Bay area right here. This is Tampa Bay. So Weedon Island is right here in St. Petersburg, right there. And if we zoom out even farther to get all of Florida. Also, Nancy, I love that you're tuning in and you are not familiar with the site. That makes me so happy. Hopefully you'll come and visit. So this is where we are in the state of Florida. So excellent question. Sorry, I didn't have a better map in there to begin with. Fantastic question, Nancy. Okay, I'll stop sharing. Let's see, we got some more questions. Can you see the springs from one of the trails? Tim, that is an excellent question. I do not know the answer to that. I will get with the people that work here and see if you can see one of the springs from the trails, but I am just not sure. I'm gonna even make a note right now. Can you see the springs from trails? And Joan, if you know the answer to that, please feel free to jump in. I'm not sure. Okay, so that's what I see in the question and answer. Yes.
I would just say no, not from any of the established trails. What remain of them are on private property, on Duke property right now. So they're not really accessible to the public.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So there you go. Excellent. So wasn't the site, okay, so Mike, we kind of answered this already. I assume you put this in a little while ago. Wasn't the site inhabited way before the Seminole? Yes, absolutely. There have been people there for thousands of years, and the Seminole as a group did not form until the 1700s. However, the Seminole are indigenous to Florida. They are still ancestors of the people who have been in Florida. So excellent question. Oh man, Pat, very fair. I got called out for using a single-use plastic bottle. I forgot my metal water bottle. I'm very sorry. I will recycle it, I promise. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's see. Can I get involved in excavation activities at Weedon? So I would suggest that if you are interested in excavations, if you're interested in information and getting involved with Weedon Island and the archaeology here, that you follow AWARE. So I will put the link in the chat right now. So this is the Alliance for Weedon Island Archaeological Research and Education. So I put the link in there. That is who I would follow for information on excavations, research, archaeology. When we used to do the labs in here, actually, we did those in partnership with AWARE, I believe. So follow them. And of course, you can follow Florida Public Archaeology Network West Central Region, and we will always keep you updated on anything that we hear about excavations at the site. Let's see. Oh, I've got a lot of chats, so hopefully I don't miss any of these. Oh, thank you, Ken. The earliest date of occupation. So the site, I can look it up in Heather's thesis and give you an exact date, but the oldest date is about 3,000 years ago, as far as I am aware. And again, Heather Draskovich, her master's research did a fantastic job of going around. Remember, I showed you that map with all those different areas, area 1 through 8, I believe. And she did a great job of actually getting carbon dates from all of those areas. And she does a beautiful job in her thesis of breaking up the site into 9 different kind of occupational phases and saying, you know, in phase 1 that dates to this, this is where people were living and what they were doing. And she goes all the way through. So her thesis is top notch. It's fantastic. So the earliest date, if I remember correctly, is about 3,000 years ago. Sharon said, I thought the Tacubaya were living in the area when the Spaniards arrived. Yes, you're correct. So the Tacubaya and the Calusa are kind of the same time frame when the Spanish arrived. They're in different areas. Calusa were further south. So they were, I don't think that we have specific dates from that time period at Weedon Island. However, again, it's a huge site and it has not been fully tested yet. And we know that people are living all around the Tampa Bay area and that the Tacubaya were living in this area. So I would assume that they were also at this site, whether they were living here and had, you know, a big presence here or not. I can't say for sure. But I would assume that they are. But again, it's archaeology. We can't say unless we have evidence. So that is one of those questions that we're going to have to, that people are actively trying to answer right now. So excellent, excellent question. Let's see. Ken asks, is there a map based on genetics showing migrations of people from Weedon Island spreading out into the southeastern United States? That is such a cool question, Ken. I do not know the full extent of this answer. As far as I know, there is not a genetics map showing specifically indigenous movements in the Southeast. And part of the reason for that is because doing destructive testing on bones is since 1990, since some of those laws have been passed to protect Native American bones, is no longer allowed. So I'm not sure. That would be an interesting study, but again, that would have to be, those are questions that we would ask with the bones of ancestors. So that would be something that tribes would have to be on board with. And as an archaeologist, I think whatever the tribes are comfortable with are what we should be doing. There are so many questions that we can answer without disturbing human remains and without disturbing and destroying bones, that I think those are, in my opinion, those are, you know, the questions that we should really be focusing on. But that is a really interesting question. Jay asked, how do we read Heather's thesis? So her name is Heather Draskovich, and I believe you can Google her thesis. She was a USF, University of South Florida master's student. So you should be able to get her thesis from the University of South Florida's library website. So check that out. It's long, but it's really, really good. She did a fantastic job. Oh, I had 2 questions about that. So excellent. And the other researcher that I mentioned a lot, Christina Perry Sampson, she was at the University of Michigan, and it was her PhD dissertation was at this site. So that's another one that you can get from, I would assume, from the University of Michigan's site. Okay, are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions, any other comments. So Joan, I will pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. To the audience, please don't run away yet. I have one last exciting poll that I would like to launch right now. And here we go. We love to get this information, this feedback from you guys so that we can continuously improve our education programs and you know, continue to add and make it happen. So I've just launched the poll. There we go. We're starting to get some activity. And while we do that, I want to thank Rachel. We are so fortunate to have a resource like Weedon Island Preserve here with the Cultural and Natural History Center, with agencies such as the Florida Public Archaeology Network and our nonprofit here on the site, Aware, doing good work, doing archaeology, and getting the word out. And it's been exciting to kick off this new series today, and also to share in the public's enthusiasm for this place and its history and what it means. And to have, thank you for the poll. I'm going to exit that. To have these resources and to be able to tap into folks as educated and plugged in as Rachel and her colleagues. And I'm looking forward to the upcoming programs as well, to really give some time to something that's very special, to a very special place. And Rachel, you did a fantastic job of making this information very relatable. And I want to thank you for putting together such a great kickoff for us today. You guys do not forget the next two programs coming up, and we'll have the links posted soon, very soon. They're both on a Saturday at 10 a.m. The first one next coming up is the one with Dr. Austin on December 11th. And the one after that is with the grad student, Kendall Jackson, a super cool guy that you're going to want to know and make some time to get to know on January 29th. Okay. So thanks for tuning in today, Rachel. I'll turn it back over to you for any closing comments you might have. And thanks
Great,
again.
yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. So thank you all so much for spending an hour of your morning with me. Thanks for the survey responses. If you have any, if you were expecting something else, or if there's something you wanted to know that I didn't cover, please feel free to contact me at FPAN or let Joan and Weedon Island know, because we want these presentations to be good for the public and to be letting you all know what you want to know. So if you have any feedback, please feel free to email. I'll actually put my email in the chat, and you can just Google Weedon Island Preserve, I assume. Let me put that in.
I'll put mine in the chat as well. Feel free.
Yeah, so you can email Joan if you have bad things to say. You can email me if you have good things to say. But we're always here to improve. And again, like my job is to talk to people about archaeology. So so it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you again to Joan and Weedon Island for letting me come and be in the classroom today and to put this series together. This is really, really exciting.
You are welcome anytime, and we'll see you again in December 11th for the next one.
Wonderful.
Thanks again. We'll see you
Thanks,
next
everyone.
time.
Bye.